41.5 PPR points. And yes, Taysom is inevitable.
If you are comparing a wide receiver to Ray McCloud, it's never in a complimentary fashion. It's always derogatory.
We like to have fun here on the show, but sometimes just tragedy strikes and we have to get through this. Giants bench Daniel Jones. Not for Drew Lock, but for the freaking Italian Tommy DeVito.
Right, and Sean Payton has to be feeling the best out of all of us.
I forced Dwayne McFarland last night to say that, yes, in fact, we are ranking him ahead of Deebo Samuel ahead of Week 12. Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Monday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it's a great day to overreact to some of the Week 11 storylines, as well as break down an ever-eventful Sunday night football matchup. But we do have a sad Bengals fan sitting here with me. Chris Allen. Sorry, man.
You know what? Last night was actually the perfect encapsulation of the Bengals season. They start off slow. T. Higgins gets hurt middle of the game, has to sit out a couple of plays, and then my team winds up coming up just short of pulling off the victory. But hey, I'm already on to 2025, brother. And what's the good part for fantasy is that we still know where our bread is buttered from the Bengals passing game. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and of course Joe Burrow. I mean, those are the guys that we wanted to roster in fantasy anyway, so it was good to see them at least perform for folks that were rostering them.
About to say, maybe not the best game for Who Day Nation, but at least for fantasy managers, it was a fun Sunday night evening. Unless you went to bed at halftime and had to watch as Joe Burrow went ahead and snatched that W like our poor producer Swing holding by on call. So no Paul Charge in today. Everyone Charge is out there doing Charge things, but rest assured we will continue to get his guillotine goodness over at FantasyLife.com throughout the week. But Chris, let's get into that Chargers 34-27 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. Chargers obviously covered as 1 point faves. The over did cash at 48 here. So winners write the history books. So we will start off with the Los Angeles side of things. Specifically, Justin Herbert, man, continuing to look like not just a great real life quarterback, but also one of the best in fantasy as well.
Yeah, it was good to see Harbaugh letting him rip, not also just as a passer, but also as a rusher. Multiple scrambles last night. We've actually seen him be able to create on the ground for the past 2 to 3 games. So you're really getting that hybrid or mobility out of Justin Herbert, whereas the earlier part of the season, all the rushing production was really contained to J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards at the earlier part until Dobbins took over. So seeing Herbert not just be able to sling it downfield to completely wide open receivers all over the place, but also being able to make it happen on the ground for folks that have been rostering him at the start of the season or maybe made a trade thinking that things were going to pick up for the Chargers. You have to be happy with what you have right now on your roster.
I mean, that I think second touchdown drive, Chris, just one laser after another out there, man.
Yeah.
And you said it. It wasn't exactly like these receivers had no one within 10 yards of them. Of course, Quentin Johnston's touchdown did seem to get a bit lost in the zone coverage, as he is known to do pretty much every single game. But again, can't speak enough about how impressive, especially the first half was for Herbert. So 297 and 2 touchdowns through the air, another 65 yards on the ground. And now, Chris, since returning from bye in week 6, only Jaylen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Bo Nix. Of course, Bo Nix have scored more fantasy points than Justin Herbert. So great stuff there. Also a great game from J.K. Dobbins, pair of rushing touchdowns, 56 yards on the ground. And another game, Chris, where yes, we did see Gus Edwards eat more into the workload. J.K. Dobbins' snap rate was at 71%, had 55% of the team's rush attempts, 56% of the routes, but still pretty clearly the J.K. Dobbins RB1 show, even if, again, those top 10 heights of the position are maybe could be a bit tougher to get to.
Right. And I know that folks were somewhat concerned over the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks where J.K. Dobbins wasn't hitting some of those explosive runs that he was getting it throughout the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. But if he's still going to be the running back that they turn to once they get inside the 5 and inside the 10, all of the stuff that honestly, if folks were looking at the utilization report that's available on FantasyLife.com, seeing how much J.K. Dobbins is getting used in the areas where it matters, you would know that Dobbins is an RB1. But either way, it was good to see that confirmation last night, Sunday night. What do you have? Like multiple goal line plunges. I mean, 3rd, 4th down, having him jump over the Bengals defensive front and wind up falling into the end zone. I mean, it was good to see that from a usage standpoint, that's still there for him. So if folks if they do have him on their roster, I mean, you have to be happy with what you got.
hopefully we're done with the whole Hassan Haskins thing. He got stuffed in the 1 yard line twice in a row. And then, yes, Dobbins managed to jump over the line on the third try as a charm. So worked out there. Also worked out nice for Lad McConkey. Buck 23 on 9 targets, caught 6 of them, has now cleared the 100-yard mark in 2 of his last 4 games. Going to need him to go off big time next Monday night against the Ravens. That should be a fun one. But Chris, I would also be remiss if I don't mention someone who you were on earlier than anyone else in the world, especially the fantasy football industry. Will Dissly, 80 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets. I got to apologize, Chris. Dwayne and I laughed at you when you brought up the Chargers tight ends this summer. That happened, and I apologize, man. Good call.
Look, it only took 12 weeks in order for it to actually happen. But hey, I'm never late. I just call things a little bit early. You know, I'm ahead of my time, man. That's where I'm at. But it was good to see. Well, I think the thing that was working in Dissly's favor was the fact that the target tree was starting to condense around him since Hayden Hurst has been out. Hadn't really seen much from any of the ancillary pass catchers. It really has been just Quentin Johnson and Lad McConkey. So to see him be able to mix in at the tight end position, and to your point earlier, just a number of laser dart throws from Justin Herbert to Will Dissly. The touchdown pass that he caught was just absolutely insane. But still, having seen the target share start to creep up over the last 2 to 3 weeks without Hurst in the lineup, you had to know that this type of performance was coming, at least from a usage standpoint. And of course, he gets the best matchup going up against the Bengals secondary, who we know has been porous and giving it up to a number of not just wide receivers, but tight ends as well. So seeing Dissly get in the box wasn't too much of a surprise, but good to see. I mean, it's good to see. I knew it was coming. All right. You guys heard it all the way back in the summertime. I knew it was coming, but it was good to see it happen.
Again, Harbaugh Bowl next week. We've all seen that Ravens secondary have a tough time slowing down just about anyone. So Will Dissly likely again going to be near the top of that tight end streamer map. And then we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, spirited second half comeback, ended up falling just short, but not before Joe Burrow racked up 356 yards and a trio of touchdowns through the air. Also chipped in 28 rushing yards. So overall majority, of course, did go to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Chase with 75 yards and 2 touchdowns on 13 targets. T. Higgins with 148 yards and a touchdown, also on 13 targets. So, yes, Chris, we've seen T. Higgins miss plenty of time this year, but man, when he has been out there, 18.5 PPR points per game. The only wide receiver with more on this season, his teammate Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, and our one true sun god. Just please, injury gods, give us T. Higgins, because anytime he's out there, Chris, we're looking at a locked-in wide receiver 1.
Without a doubt. And it was good to see, and we knew that at least the concern was coming into this game was if T. Higgins was going to be on the field, what would the workload look like for Andre Yoshivas? What would it look like for Mike Gesicki? And we had seen some of that in the earlier parts of the season when he had been healthy. Mike Gesicki really relegated to that tight end 2 realm. Same thing for Yoshivas and even Jermaine Burton when he was able to mix in at the wide receiver position. But with Higgins and Chase out there on the field, the offense operated as we would want it to, like those two being the focal points of the passing game, both earning like 13 targets, and seeing Higgins have like that slightly higher air yard share. It's just the hope would be that this is what continues on for the rest of the season. And me being the neurotic Bengals fan, maybe that continues into 2025 at the right price, but still, I think it's if T and Chase are out there, they have to be in your starting lineup.
Did seem like Higgins might have got a little banged up at the end. You mentioned also earlier in the game, played through that issue. Never a dull, 10 minutes of action without Higgins having something go wrong. Bengals do have a week 12 bye, though, so fingers crossed, knock on wood, that he will be good to go by then. Also, big game from Chase Brown, 86 yards on the ground, 5 catches, 57 yards, so good to see there. You did mention the Mike Gesicki goose egg. However, Chris, it didn't actually come due to reduced usage. Actually had a season-high 77% route rate, even with the return of T. Higgins. Only difference is, again, when we do have Higgins and Chase out there, that's where Burrow's attention is going, not as much to his big slot tight ends. So definitely going to be a downgrade in the ranks once we get into week 13 action. But for now, get healthy, get right, Bengals, and, we'll see what happens. Really sad news, Chris. We like to have fun here on the show, but sometimes just tragedy strikes and we have to get through this. Giants bench Daniel Jones, not for Drew Lock. Not for the backup of the whole year, not for the guy they paid to be the backup, but for the freaking Italian Tommy DeVito. I know, I like the celebration too. It's cool. But what the hell, Chris? Can we not have nice things?
No, we can't have nice things. I thought, to your point, when we were talking through Slack before the show started, I thought we were going to be just blaring Jeezy or something like that as we were having to break the news to the rest of the folks watching the show. We can't even do that. Of course, I come on here as a sad Bengals fan, hoping with this news I'd also be able to listen to some good music and talk about. I can't even do that. But now we have this. I would say though, with Tommy Cutlets back in the lineup, can we expect to see a bit more out of the Giants offense? We saw the scrambling ability, we saw the rushing ability from Cutlets during his stint as the Giants starter last year, but also his willingness to throw the ball downfield. We saw in the Giants' last game, Daniel Jones' inability just to hit wide open receivers. Wan'Dale Robinson completely wide open. There was Malik Neighbors also completely wide open on a number of plays. Daniel Jones not willing to take that shot. Hopefully with Cutlets out there, we see that start to happen a bit more. So for folks that are rostering Malik Neighbors, for folks that are even looking for production from any of the other guys that are sitting there, Tyrone Tracy even, I mean, that should at least give you some hope that we get a bit more out of the Giants moving forward.
Certainly a great matchup on the horizon against the Buccaneers. But yeah, guys, Tommy DeVito, we've all seen his agent. It's funny, even as a Drew Lock stan, a sad Drew Lock stan, I can admit that. But DeVito was pretty bad last year, man. I mean, 54 qualified quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons. He was actually 50th in EPA per dropback, only ahead of Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and Bailey Zappi. 46 in terms of completion percentage over expected. So again, had that nice game against Washington, had 3 touchdowns, 200 yards, but only had 4 touchdowns in his other 5 starts combined. So can't really get worse. We saw that, London theme, or it might have been Munich theme performance where, as you mentioned, Chris, Daniel Jones missing one receiver after another. Also with this season essentially lost, they wanted to protect themselves from Daniel Jones's $23 million injury guarantee. But yeah, man, was hoping we could at least have Drew Lock out there, who, don't get it wrong, guys, was not going to elevate this Giants team into being a contender or anything like that. Their offense, honestly, maybe could have been worse with Drew Lock than it was with Daniel Jones, but I guarantee you it would have been more fun for better and probably mostly worse. But maybe one day we'll see what happens. But for now, guys, we will go ahead and get through some other Week 11 reactions right after a quick word to our friends over at Knockaround. Get my Chargers shades on. Rocking that blue and yellow. Chargers, all of a sudden, charging is looking much, much better ahead of that Harbaugh Bowl. And you guys can check out sunglasses like this and much more. They have plenty of normal shades in addition to their NFL collection over at knockaround.com. Polarized lenses for less than $50, and cannot stress enough just how high quality these are with the UV 400 protection for your eyes. And again, overall, just good looks. When I got the box of all the NFL sunglasses, which I cannot thank Knockaround for enough, I figured they'd be more of the flimsy, just have these NFL teams sort of frame styles. But no, honestly, guys, these are some of the best frames and overall sunglasses I have ever had. So again, you can check out the officially licensed NFL collection over at knockaround.com. Just make sure you use code LIFE for free shipping on your order. All right, Chris, it is Monday, which means it is time to panic and overreact to some of the bigger storylines from Sunday, starting with Lamar Jackson, who is amazing, unless maybe he's playing the Chiefs, Steelers, or in the playoffs. Now, not the biggest dud in the world, was the QB 22, but kind of funny how the worst we've seen from Lamar this year still produces 14.9 fantasy points, but was the first time this season he fell outside the top 12 at the position. Are you at all worried about what's to come next from Lamar and the Baltimore Ravens?
No, I'm not worried about Lamar specifically. Maybe his pass catchers I might have some concern about, Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers to a smaller degree. But I was watching that game back, and one of the intrusive thoughts that popped into my head as I was watching how well the Steelers were able to cover quite a few of, if it's not Flowers, Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Bateman. Did the Ravens do the Ravens think they missed out on getting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins like at the trade deadline? It just seems like if they had a larger, more like your prototypical wide receiver one, would they be able to convert? Would Lamar Jackson have one of those targets that would allow him to, if he's scrambling or if the coverage really forces him in order to make some of those throws to guys like Bateman or Aguilar, you have somebody that's a bit more sure-handed. You have somebody that has a bit more of that savviness as a wide receiver, because Zay Flowers in this game, the fact that he was more or less blanketed from a coverage standpoint, unable to really convert or allow them to be able to operate the passing game as well. I think that really did stick out. But for Lamar Jackson specifically, we saw his rushing ability still being able to be there. The floor was still there for Lamar. It was kind of interesting, though, that the Steelers came out and their plan was to just blitz the heck out of him, almost a 50% blitz rate. That was the first time or the third time so far this season that we've seen it. But with the fact that the Steelers have such a good secondary, they're able to really not allow him to look downfield and hit some of those receivers that we normally would see him do.
And hey, obviously the probable soon-to-be 3-time MVP going to be held to a higher standard than most quarterbacks, but everyone is going to struggle against the Chiefs and the Steelers and also in the playoffs. So it does seem a bit unreasonable at times to only hold these things against Lamar. But again, these are the sort of topics that us talking heads need to get to because there's not much else we can poke at in Lamar's game. So they have the Chargers and the Eagles over these next 2 weeks, then a week 14 bye, and then the Giants, Steelers, and Texans rest of the way. I have a feeling he'll continue to be the QB1 in our fantasy rankings. But yeah, man, at least maybe in some of these tougher matchups, you can talk yourself into putting someone like Hartitz or maybe even a Josh Allen ahead of him. But we will get to that when we need to. Another overreaction, Chris. This one I think is much more reason to panic. But Jaylen Waddle, man, is he officially droppable? Because my God, man, 8.6% target share and by far the Dolphins' best game of the year. Ray McLeod has more PPR points per game than Jaylen Waddle at this point. Chris, what are we doing here?
If you are comparing a wide receiver to Ray McLeod, it's never in a complimentary fashion. It's always derogatory. I would say for Jaylen Waddle specifically, he doesn't fit with this version of the offense. Now, the week 1, week 2-ish version of Miami's offense, it was the same as it had been with Tua, Mike McDaniel. I mean, all of those guys. I mean, it was the downfield shots. It was the high air yard pass throws. It was the aerial attack that we wanted to see, or the explosiveness that we were hoping that we would get, like in the first couple of weeks. That's not really the way that Tua is playing the game right now. Like in the 4 weeks since he's been back, his air yards per attempt have been 5.1, 4.9, 5.5, and 4.9 air yards. That doesn't really help it if, as a wide receiver, you're primarily playing on the outside and you're running more downfield, working in the intermediate parts of the field. That doesn't really fit. I mean, that's why Tyreek Hill has been able to operate well. He's produced somewhat well as a fantasy asset. That's why we've seen more of Jonnu Smith. Those guys are running the crossing route. Those guys are running like the short intermediate slants and hitch routes that Tua is able to hit at this point, not Jaylen Waddle. If you just look at how the types of routes that he's running more hitches, like intermediate hitches, like a few crossing routes and these go routes that are farther down the field that Tua really isn't like trying to hit at this point. So with the way that also, Waddle only has one end zone target. That's it since Tua's been back. So if we're not getting even that type of usage for him, and we can see how Tyreek is being used, we see how Jonnu Smith is being used, and that's not the same way Waddle's getting used, it's safe to drop him at this point because he just doesn't fit the way this offense is operating.
He's the wide receiver 60 on the season, wide receiver 70 per game. He's the number 4 option on his own offense, man, which is just wild. Yeah. We assumed it was going to be Tyreek 1 and Waddle 2, but still getting triple-digit targets more likely than not. Not the case at all, guys. Tyreek, 68 targets this year. Jonnu Smith has 52. Devon Achane has 51. And again, resting his 4th is Jaylen Waddle at 47. So had a wide receiver 16 finish in week 1. That was cool. Hasn't even cracked the top 36 since. I mean, we did our award show here a couple weeks ago, Chris, and I know Marvin Harrison Jr. and Sam Laporta were the 2 big names that we kind of talked about as the bust of the year. But at this point, man, especially in the best ball streets where we have Waddle going in round 2 more often than not, man, I think it's pretty hard removing, the injured players from the equation to not go with Waddle at this point.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing. And if you were to look at their upcoming schedule, I would say maybe there are a couple of matchups that look like you would want to start Waddle. They've got the Patriots coming up, and we've seen how porous or how bad their secondary can be, because I would assume Christian Gonzalez is going to be on Tyreek Hill. So that might give a couple of advantageous shots for Jaylen Waddle. But who's going to want to start him, especially with the playoffs just right around the corner? Green Bay after that. Jets, we know that their perimeter secondary has been tested a couple of times, and the Texans after that. So if I just looked at the matchups, just agnostic of what we've seen from Waddle so far, I would say, yep, I might slot him in as my wide receiver 3, maybe throw him in as a high upside flex play without knowing anything else about it. But looking at the numbers, looking at how the film is shaking out with him over the past few weeks since Tua has been back, I don't want him anywhere near my rosters. I'd just rather put him on the waiver wire. Let somebody else pick him up and have them deal with him.
And we've had the good matchups. We had the Rams last week and the Raiders in this one. So as much as I hear you, Patriots, Packers, Jets, Texans, Niners, and Browns, I don't think those are going to be, completely just shut down worthy matchups for the Dolphins passing game, but tough to see Waddle exactly rising up anyway. So certainly been rough. And yeah, guys, Ray freaking McLeod. What a time to be alive. So getting a little bit negative there, but we got some positive stud overreactions on the way, guys, right after a quick word to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. I could use a Mike's Hard Lemonade after that Drew Lock news or lack thereof this morning, Chris, because fantasy football is here. And while that may be cause for celebration, there will also be some hard days ahead. That said, guys, Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. So after a hard day spent scouring the waiver wire or crying about Drew Lock or concocting the perfect trade or tinkering endlessly with your starting lineup, it is time to quench your hard-earned thirst with a Mike's Hard Lemonade. All right, Chris, good vibes now. I'll turn those frowns upside down and appreciate the inevitable Taysom Hill. My gosh, man. Biggest tight end fantasy performance of the last 3 years, 41.5 PPR points. And as our YouTube subscribers can see, yes, Taysom is inevitable out here. So not like this has been a weekly occurrence this year. I mean, we've now seen Taysom for 7 games. He's finished as a tight end 23, tight end 34, 5, 30, 5, 22. And of course, this last Sunday, the overall tight end 1. But, Chris, when you do look at some of the injuries and I guess just the changing workloads that led to this performance in the first place, it does seem likely that he can string together some more and maybe not this big of finishes the rest of the way, but certainly be someone who deserves to be in starting lineups of most shapes and sizes.
And I think that's the first thing that came to my mind when seeing how well Taysom Hill has been able to produce is just what it took in order to get here. I mean, pour one out for Rashid Shaheed, pour one out for Bub Means, pour one out for Jamal Williams, Kendrick Miller. The list goes on and on and on for the Saints so far in terms of how many starters that they've lost in order to elevate or to push Taysom Hill up to the point where Derek Carr doesn't have any other options. Spencer Rattler and Jake Hayner didn't have too many other options. It was Taysom Hill and nobody else. So he was inevitable because there was nobody else. They didn't have anybody else to pass to, especially with Chris Olave getting crunched and his future as a wide receiver in the NFL definitely in question at this point with the number of concussions he's sustained. So from a availability standpoint, what is the saying? Availability is probably your best ability as a professional athlete. That has to be the case for Taysom Hill. Him being out there and being able to secure over 5 targets per game, but also around 9 touches per game, averaging 9 touches per game since week 8, since coming back. That's the most of any tight end so far this season, only behind Travis Kelce in terms of red zone touches as well. If you need that type of production, and I would say for most folks at the tight end position, unless you're rostering Will Dissly, you have to have that guy on your roster. But I would say for Taysom Hill specifically, he has been a part of the perfect storm to get in the point where we have to consider him as a top tight end the rest of the season.
I think it'd be really hard to name more than probably 5, Chris. Kittle, McBride, Kelce, Bowers, obviously. But again, if you wanted to go with them right there, I don't think you're going to find too many arguers. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone huge. But Taysom Hill, either way, again, man, upside tight end 1 the rest of the way. Not next week. I don't think he's going to be able to overcome that bye. But after that, Rams, Giants, Commanders, Packers. Week 17, Chris, against a Raiders team that looks like they've already quit on the season. So good luck once you got Taysom Hill running through that A-gap. My goodness gracious. So again, I would say this was an outlier. Okay, we all remember that other big, huge multi-touchdown game from 2022, I believe it was, and that was great. I mean, again, last 3 years, this performance was the overall tight end 1 game. That performance was tight end 7. Those are his only 2 performances, though, over even 20 fantasy points. So really has been when he has these big games, they are absolutely massive. But between that, been a bit more boomer busty. And that's reality when we have someone making the bulk of his production really through the run game. Although with those 8 catches yesterday, maybe signs are changing here ahead. Talk about another Cleveland, just situation, Chris. A bit more positive, I guess, kind of, than the Bengals. Not really, but Jameis Winston at least is doing some cool stuff. The fantasy roller coaster is back. QB7, QB21, and then QB6 fantasy finishes this year as a team starter. 0 interceptions on Sunday, presumably securing that starting job for at least another week. Maybe the Browns can just find a kicker at some point that can not completely tank what they're trying to do offensively. But hey, we knew this matchup against the Saints was going to be winnable enough. That said, things get really tough moving forward. We got the Steelers in 2 of the next 3 weeks. They've allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing QBs. The Broncos sandwich between that, they've allowed the 4th fewest. And then to close things out over this hellacious 4-week stretch, we do have the defending champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. So, Chris, banged up offensive line, just lost Jauan Jennings for the season as well. Do you trust that Jameis Winston can keep the good times rolling against tougher competition moving forward?
I do, and we'll probably have another conversation about Jameis Winston to close out this show, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be one of those, don't watch the game, just wait until the game's over, look at the box score, and 300 yards and a few touchdowns. Don't look at the interception column either. Okay, but are you going to get some good production at Jameis Winston? I can definitely see that happen. I think the thing, though, for Winston specifically is that he does have that ability to beat up on, I would say, weaker secondaries. So I don't want to call them bad defenses. I don't want to disparage any of the Ravens fans and any of the Saints fans that are still out there, Cooter Doodle specifically. Don't want to disparage your team or anything like that. But he does have that penchant for being able to put up good production against teams with those weaker secondaries. The Ravens, walking into that game a few weeks ago, bottom 10, bottom 12 in terms of zone coverage, and the same thing for the Saints. And we do know that Winston has been able to put up a good, decent amount of yardage against like each of those squads. And that's the same case for both Denver and KC that he does have coming up like over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Like they are more of a zone coverage type team, and with Jameis having multiple pass catchers at his that he can throw to downfield, I can see a scenario where he does put up a decent amount of yardage to at least keep us happy as fantasy managers.
And I honestly was surprised, and maybe it came down to just the fact, I think it was literally the Browns' first drive of the game. They tried to go to Chubb on 4th and 1. He just got completely stonewalled out there, man. Not blaming him so much. It was a good effort by the Saints and everything. But I wouldn't have been shocked coming out of their bye, Chris, if they embrace a bit more of a run-heavy approach. And it was the opposite. I mean, I'm looking at our team styles tab in Dwayne's fantastic utilization report suite set right now, and plus 9% drop back rate over expected, second highest mark of the season for the Cleveland Browns. So if they really are going to let Jameis go full Jameis, we don't have DTR out there. Yeah, I'm not as worried about these matchups. So will we continue to see that same sort of ideology if we get another 3 interception performance from Jameis? That's where things get tougher. But at least for now in the near future, we can feel good about Jameis. And of course, his pass catchers in these 3 games now, Chris, we've seen Jameis target Jerry Jeudy the most at 30 targets, but right behind him is Elijah Moore with 29. Third place, Cedric Tillman, but the most air yards at 28. And then David Njoku right there at 23. So are you still buying Tillman as the wide receiver 1 here? Because I will say, man, Jeudy looked awfully good yesterday.
I don't know about as the wide receiver 1, but you still have to consider both him and Jeudy are in the top 12, top 16-ish range moving forward, just because that's the way Jameis Winston likes to play. In all of his starts so far, 40-plus attempts in every game that he started so far for the Browns, 400 air yards of offense, and 3 straight starts also for Jameis Winston. Now, and that's the part of where we like to hear those numbers, we like to see those numbers, we like to see the fact that he is more of the aggressive passer, averaging around 9-10 air yards per attempt. But that's where it becomes something of a double-edged sword. I mean, the only other quarterbacks that are passing with that level of aggression right now are Anthony Richardson, sitting about 11 to 12 air yards per attempt, Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, and Jordan Love. All those quarterbacks where in any one game, in any 1 week, they can win you your week, but they can summarily lose you your week because they do have that type of aggression that can lead to multiple interceptions. But for Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and Cedric Tillman, all 3 of those guys, since Jameis Winston has taken over, they all sit within the top 10 in terms of air yards per game, around 112, 120, somewhere in there, per game for all 3 of them. So if they are each equally going to be seeing that same level of targets from Jameis Winston, you have to at least consider them as, I would say, wide receiver 2s, at least for all 3 of them. And for Elijah Moore, man, really seeing him coming on from the slot so far, I really like his matchups over the next couple of weeks. So Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, I'm liking those guys. Jeudy being more of the guy that they use outside. We'll have to see how things go for him.
And the Joe could get more of those checkdowns, which, again, as we've seen from guys like Brock Bowers, to a lesser extent Evan Ingram, when you do have that lower ADOT safety valve tight end, it can't help shield you from the more erratic QB performances that we see throughout the league. All right, let's talk about an offense that is absolutely grooving. They have been all year, Chris, and they just got done massacring the Jaguars. And accordingly, Doug Peterson, the Detroit Lions, now sitting with a plus 159 point differential on the season. The Bills at plus 106 are the only other team even in triple digits. So in terms of historically speaking, it's not like this is the best number we've seen, but man, we've looked at some of these past matchups, Chris, against the Cowboys, against the Titans, against the Jaguars, just running up the score on them because, yes, we're seeing once again an elite version of this Ben Johnson-led Lions offense, first in points per game, but they were fifth in points per game over these past 2 years. The big difference has been this defense, even without the services of Aiden Hutchinson here for the better part of the last half of the season, man, they are now fifth in points per game. Previously in Dan Campbell's era, they were 31st, 28th, and 23rd. So Detroit Lions, Chris, looking a lot like the best team in football right now.
It's complementary football. The defense is shutting guys down and at least making it very difficult for offenses to operate. But then, of course, the offense has just been putting up just video game numbers on a left to right basis. It's funny. I say video game numbers because you've got Sonic and Knuckles out of the backfield. It doesn't matter which RB is out there. You want to have both of them on your roster. I wouldn't say start both of them, though. That's kind of tough to do. But still, you want to have those guys on your roster. David Montgomery so far, the 2 rushing touchdowns just yesterday. It's also being able to operate from a short yardage standpoint, but of course, Jahmyr Gibbs as either a runner or a receiver, the ability for him to just hit the jets, and that's the reception that he had down the right sideline. I thought he was going to go the distance, to be quite honest, and he was going to wind up getting into the box again. But between those two, they are essentially the resurgence of Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram, however many years ago. It was like boom and zoom. Those guys are really allowing us to take a look at running backs, like tandem running backs, and having them both being able to produce as fantasy assets. I love seeing both of them on the field.
This season now, Gibbs sitting as the RB7 in PPR points per game and Montgomery as the RB12. So if they can keep that going for the rest of the way, they would join, as you mentioned it, Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram, I believe from 2017, as well as last year's Devon H. and Raheem Mostert. Only teammate RB duos to both finish inside the top 12 during the same season in at least the last 10 or 12 years. So yeah, man, Gibbs just moves at a different speed, man. I'm looking at it right now. Next gen stats, fastest ball carriers. Only Brian Thomas Jr. and Jahmyr Gibbs have eclipsed 22 miles per hour with the football in their hands this season. So, man, just truly fast, and accordingly, pretty great to have on the squad. So, another matchup, Chris, where, again, we've seen the Lions tested against some better teams. Texans was a 3-point game. Packers, 10-point game. Vikings was a 2-point game. All wins for the Lions, kudos to them and everything. But going up against the Colts next week, man, as nice as Anthony Richardson looked, and we'll be talking about him in a second, tend to think this could be another one where let's not overthink it. Let's just get all these lines into our lineups.
100%. And Jameson Williams probably being the one that folks are at least want to try and gravitate to. I wrote him up in my wide receiver cornerbacks matchups column. He was the cover boy for last week's column. In that, I think the underrated storyline coming out of their game against the Texans was that Williams walked into about a 20% target share in their game against the Texans. And that was after his 2-game suspension. He just walks right back into essentially being the team's wide receiver 2, battling with Amon-Ra St. Brown for targets. And of course, we knew coming into this game without seeing Sam Laporta on the field that there might be some room for a couple more targets. And while that necessarily didn't work out as intended, Tim Patrick wound up getting worked in for a few targets. Or not Tim Patrick, rather. I think there were a few other guys that wound up getting worked in for Khalif Raymond. There we go. Thank you. That got worked in for a few more targets. But still, it was good to see Jameson Williams show off the speed, get over 100 yards. Locked in for about a 20% target share. So if that's the level of opportunity we can expect to see from Williams, and it's not just the fact that he's getting used inside the slot in some of the intermediate targets, but also downfield, he should be a wide receiver too, especially with a wide receiver 1 upside for the rest of the season.
And also, I'm sure we'll be hearing from the No Fun League with that Marshawn Lynch celebration that he had going on to the end zone. We appreciate you, Jameson Williams. Never a dull moment there in that life. Chris, let's talk about some Anthony Richardson here. He's back. Looked really great yesterday. I mean, again, a game that it looked like the Jets were going to seize in the fourth quarter, but not so fast, my friend. Back-to-back 70-yard touchdown drives to go ahead and steal that one and get the Indy Colts into the win column. So, mentioned it before, man, going to be a tough matchup against the Detroit Lions, but it was at least a good reminder of what Richardson is capable in fantasy land. 28 fantasy points, man. Now I'm looking at it as just, again, 11 career games here. Shout out Pro Football Reference, some of the data, but he's had 29.6, 28, 26, 20, and he's had another 5 performances under 10 points, Chris. So when we do look at these rushing quarterbacks, we love the idea of their floor, but their passing ability is almost so volatile that they are a bit more boom or busty than maybe we give them credit for. Do you think we'll get another boom out of Richardson against the Lions, or maybe do we crash back to reality a little bit?
Hopefully somewhere in between. I don't want to come on here and tell folks that maybe took a shot on Anthony Richardson and picked him up, started him this week if they had to because of buys and whatnot, and they have to thrust him into their lineup again in week 12 and say that, no, it's going to be bad. I would say with his rushing ability still being there, and it's not like we did get a little bit of efficiency out of Jonathan Taylor, but still seeing Anthony Richardson being able to work inside the 5, inside the 10 as a rusher, find the end zone a couple of times, that at least should give you some confidence to start him from a fantasy standpoint. But I would say from a passing standpoint as well, that we saw at least the steps forward that we would want to see from Anthony Richardson. It wasn't the super high completion rate, but still, I mean, over 50% success rate as a passer. That was one of the highest marks for him throughout the season. And also when he was pressured in the obvious passing situations. And to check this out real quick. So on 3rd and 4th downs throughout the season so far, his average depth of target on 3rd downs, 35 yards per attempt. That was in week 1, 15 yards, 20 yards. That was in his three or four full starts over the past season. Only about 9 yards just on Sunday. Wow. So it's a little bit more control, a little bit more efficiency. Again, those are the things that we want to see. I think my biggest problem, though, is that anybody outside of Josh Downs, I can't have too much confidence in. It was good to see A.D. Mitchell hit him on an explosive. Michael Pittman, whatever he's dealing with right now, not as relevant from a fantasy standpoint. I think that those are my concerns. It's that you really just has Josh Downs to work with and not too many other guys that we're trying to roster at this point. So good step forward. Lions are going to put as much pressure on him as possible and force him to beat him as a passer. And with the way that they've been able to stifle opposing passing games, it might be a tougher sledding for Anthony Richardson, but the rushing production we know is going to be there.
Lions play so much man coverage. They do have this kind of boomer busty style on defense where they are going to create a bunch of negative plays and kill some drives, create some turnovers. But man, if they do let Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, A.D. Mitchell, to your point, get some one-on-one coverage, maybe the Colts can rip off some big ones. So I think they're 10.5-point dogs right now. Don't think that's even necessarily too egregious, but yeah, at a minimum, man, a bit more fun seeing Richardson out there than old man Joe Flacco. So for that, we thank you, Indy. More reactions on the way, everyone. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets instantly. And you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Chris, from one dual threat quarterback to another, bit more polished in this case, we have Josh Allen taking down the big back Kansas City Chiefs with an electric rushing touchdown. Even got the call saying it was the, play of the year in the NFL, which I think Jaden Daniels probably has something to say about that. But regardless, was a really fun moment. And now, man, all of a sudden it looks like Josh Allen here to win the AFC and also maybe some fantasy championships, especially with how well he's been playing lately on the ground specifically.
Yeah, and it's funny because the more you take away from Josh Allen, the more he just winds up putting on his own shoulders and saying, well, I'm just going to do it myself. He puts on that Superman cape and then runs it in with the best of them. And in his last 4 games, he had 2.5 and 0.7 just fantasy points he was able to create as a rusher. Against the Colts, 11 points, 11 of those fantasy points were made as a runner, 11.5 against the Chiefs. It doesn't you can take away Keon Coleman, doesn't matter. Mac Hollins, don't even need him. Amari Cooper, who's that? I don't even know who that is. Dalton Kincaid, I don't care. I'm just going to do it myself. And that seems to be the Josh Allen way. I mean, 11.1% scrambling rate against the Chiefs. That is season high for Josh Allen. And I would say credit where it's due, not just to Allen, but also Joe Brady. The fact that they were able to come up with this game plan, knowing that they were going to be down, let's say, I don't want to call Keon Coleman their wide receiver one, but let's say one of the top pass catchers, one of the guys that forces defenses to honor the intermediate to deep parts of the field. And Amari Cooper coming in banged up, missing 2 games and only having about, a game and a half to really get in sync with Josh Allen. Coming in with that game plan and seeing Josh Allen operate and have just a similar passing success rate, similar efficiency numbers across the board. Credit to Joe Brady and Josh Allen for coming up with the right game plan, and of course, Allen being able to execute.
Even getting some goodness out of Curtis Samuel, who coming into this game was the worst Bills pass catcher just in terms of passer rating when targeted. And that is really the interesting thing, Chris, because I have my 32 facts article go out every Friday. And I wanted to look at, what Bills pass catchers were just the most efficient in terms of their passer rating when targeted. And the top 3, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, and Dawson Knox, man. So a little bit of a small sample size there, but you do look at Josh, man, and 5th in passer rating on targets to his running backs and tight ends this year. I think that's just more of an indication that Josh Allen really is that good. Doesn't need to be surrounded by, again, the world's best wide receiver core in order to keep on keeping on. So rest assured, we would like to get Keon Coleman back. We want Amari Cooper to be more ingrained in the offense, but they do have a week 12 bye to hopefully get healthy and make those, potential possibilities realities. And then after that, man, 49ers, Rams, Lions, Patriots, and Jets. So smashable stretch there, and accordingly would not be surprised if indeed Josh Allen is helping us get some new fantasy football jewelry. Talk about another quarterback who's just been doing some great things recently, Chris. Bo Nix, QB1 in 5 of his last 7 starts, and excuse my arbitrary cutoff, but since week 5, only Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Jalen Hurts have more fantasy points. So it's funny we're on here, Chris, because we made some trades in one of our dynasty leagues. I traded up to the 101 to get Caleb Williams. Not feeling so great about that, but I made another trade trying to get up into the middle part of the first round to get J.J. McCarthy, only for you to actually trade out of your spot. Someone jumps me, takes McCarthy, and I had to settle for Bo Nix. But all of a sudden, Chris, I don't feel like I'm settling at all. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Right, and Sean Payton has to be feeling the best out of all of us because he was the same guy that was saying that he was going to be he wasn't saying he was going to be the second coming of Patrick Mahomes, but still, I mean, that was the guy that he wanted in the first couple of weeks. I had some questions about that because 6 interceptions Bo Nix has thrown in throughout this season. 4 of them came within the first 2 weeks. But outside of that, I mean, he has a floor ceiling combo high enough that he should be considered at least in the top 12. I mean, we have it surprisingly enough. Bo Nix has only had 4 top 12 finishes so far this season, but because he does have that high floor given his rushing ability, and we've seen him pop up for at least a few a decent passing yardage game so far, that he can get into that top 12 when he needs to. And looking at his upcoming schedule, the Raiders, Cleveland, and of course on by then facing the Colts, once we get into the fantasy playoffs, I mean, from a defensive matchup standpoint and with how comfortable he is in Sean Payton's system so far, and with the rushing portion of it, top 12-ish, I can definitely see it for Bo Nix.
And again, the accuracy has been a bit erratic all season long, but even going back to some of those earlier performances, you could just tell he was understanding where to go with the football when things weren't there. He's continued to do a great job avoiding sacks, which was really his calling card at Oregon. And as much as you watch those highlights from yesterday, I admit a lot of them were to wide open receivers. The fact that Sean Payton's getting him wide open receivers with, I think, what we could comfortably still call a bottom 5 wide receiver room in the league just really means great things, for Knicks and this Broncos offense moving forward. So one of the better storylines. And again, another reminder, everyone, that not saying Bo Nix is going to be a future Hall of Famer or anything, but especially in fantasy football land, really be careful about writing off any of these young quarterbacks, no matter what you think about them in college. Chris and I are old enough to remember when guys like Daniel Jones, Justin Herbert, and now Bo Nix pretty much written off from day one. And I understand. I just lumped Daniel Jones with those guys. He had some good years as a pure fantasy quarterback, Chris, and that's my point here. You get these guys with the dual threat capabilities, and good things can happen, particularly when you pair them with someone who, I know not everyone loves Sean Payton, but let's face it, the numbers in the resume speak for itself when you do look at his offensive ability. All right, Chris.
One last point on that, though. I would say that for when we came into the season, I would say that for Bo Nix specifically, we didn't have too many players that we wanted to pair him with. I'm just thinking back to best ball season because that's how a lot of folks want to try and correlate their rosters. And Bo Nix, it was Cortland Sutton and pretty much nobody else that we were thinking were going to be just like high-end options for him. And that really has borne out so far. 6 different pass catchers with double-digit targets in the last 4 games and 8 different pass catchers with at least 1 touchdown. So it does kind of shake out that we don't know from like who we want to trust or who we'd want to pair him with. And I'm assuming once we get into the 2025 season, Bo Nix is definitely going to be in our top 12. But we're going to have that same conundrum, I'm assuming, from a wide receiver standpoint, because who's going to want to really go out there and pair Bo Nix with Troy Franklin? Are we really going to go out there and also try and stack him with Lil Jordan Humphrey? I think we're still going to have the same problem. But to your point, Ian, is that we should look at quarterback talent instead of just trying to look at the roster around him and see, is this quarterback actually good or not, just based off of the folks that we're going to be drafting with him.
And again, anytime you have a quarterback priced down that low, I mean, around the QB 30, and you have a reasonable assumption that they're going to be starting 17 games, really tough for them to completely bust when you compare them against the, RB 70 and the wide receiver 80 that they're usually going next to at that point. So you did mention it really is Cortland Sutton and everyone else. 94% route rate for Sutton, 74% for Devon Valet. But other than that, no wide receiver was above 55%. No tight end managed to crack even 30%. So feel good about Nix, feel good about Sutton ahead of, again, what should be more fantasy goodness. Talk about wide receiver, Chris, who really is working his way up the ranks. I forced Dwayne McFarland last night to say that, yes, in fact, we are ranking him ahead of Deebo Samuel, ahead of week 12. Jauan Jennings, the wide receiver 6 over the past 2 weeks, Chris, proving much to be so much more than just that 1 week boom coming off that, again, huge performance against the Rams earlier in the season.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that I've noticed so far for just the offense in general, not specific to Jauan Jennings, is how much calmer Brock Purdy looks in the pocket. And I say calmer in the sense that he's taking fewer deep shots. When I was talking earlier about how Anthony Richardson plays and also just like how Anthony Richardson plays and also how some of the like Jameis Winston plays, that aggression downfield, haven't seen that from Brock Purdy. He was throwing at one of the higher depths of targets, like from a passing standpoint in the early parts of the year. Over this past 4 games, 9.3 air yards per attempt against the Chiefs, 7.4 against the Cowboys, 7 against the Bucs, and 5.5 against the Seahawks. That's what it's allowed some of his pass catchers to create after the catch, and that was a hallmark of the 49ers offense over the past couple of seasons. So looking at Jauan Jennings last week, 33% target share, 8.7 utilization report score. And now those are the 2 strong indicators that I wanted to look at and say that this is probably a wide receiver 1 because we have CMC back. George Kittle's in the lineup. Of course, we know Brandon Ayuk's going to be out. And we're still seeing this level of usage from Jauan Jennings. And so given the fact that he's now like 2 weeks in a row, we now have a 2-week sample with him, still getting a high-end target share, seeing the pass level efficiency from Brock Purdy, and looking at their upcoming matchups, a couple of them look pretty tough. I mean, they got the Packers coming up. They've got the Bills also in the next couple of weeks as they come out of their bye. But still, given this level of usage and the fact that Brock Purdy has been at least targeting the shorter intermediate parts of the field to allow his receivers to create versus trying to hit those explosives down the field, bodes well for a guy like Jauan Jennings, who's played really good ball so far this season.
I think it just helps them, especially in the absence of Brayuk, to have this, I call him Brayuk, Brandon Ayuk, 6'3", 215-pound wide receiver. I mean, look, Kittle, I know, can go up and make those catches as well, but with CMC, with Debo, you're not always going to have this schemed wide open guy, and accordingly, Jauan Jennings this year has caught over 50% of his contested catches, and just in terms of passer rating when targeted, the most efficient pass catcher in this 49ers offense, which is saying a lot considering some of the other players we got going on there. So I'm sure when we have Kittle back, Ricky Parasol gets a little bit more involved. Not saying that Jennings is going to continue being a wide receiver one the rest of the way, but man, again, over these last 2 weeks, 22 targets for Jennings, just 13 for Debo. Still haven't seen Debo really be able to crack into that rushing success in the same manner as past years. Yes, at least for week 12, guys, we are going with Jennings over Debo Samuel. One more wide receiver note out of the NFC West. Chris had another great game from Jaxon Smith-Njigba. My God, this dude had 0 games his entire rookie season with 65 receiving yards. Last 3 weeks, he's gone for, not last 3 games, I should say, he's gone for 69, 180, and 110. And just from an eye test perspective, man, looking good doing it.
Yeah, and I actually noted him as a guy to try to avoid. So that's mea culpa. I'll definitely hold up my hand and say that that's on me for looking at JSN's matchup going up against the recently played Diamadou Lenore for the 49ers, their slot corner, and say that that's probably going to be a bad matchup. And of course, with Metcalf coming back, the expectation was that JSN would see fewer targets. His opportunity would be lesser. And that had been borne out in the throughout the first, 8-9 weeks of the season. His target share was around 20% with Metcalf in the lineup, air yard share around 20%, even his efficiency as a receiver around 1.1 yards per route run. So the expectation, at least looking at it from that standpoint, was we were going to see less of JSN, not just from an opportunity standpoint, from efficiency. But lo and behold, over 3.14 yards per route run just this past week, and also leading the team in air yards and targets. And that's what we would want to see out of a guy, or just battling with the DK Metcalf, just right behind him in terms of air yards. But that's what we would want to see from a wide receiver too. And also seeing less of Tyler Lockett. This late in the season, we could see JSN really start to ascend into that wide receiver 2 role we hope for him. And now with Seahawks still having a shot for the playoffs, Arizona, Jets, Green Bay, on the docket for the next 4 weeks. All decent enough matchups that we should see a bit more out of JSN moving forward.
Air yards of help, but also JSN just seemingly making more out of his underneath opportunities in terms of that yak ability. Really great to see from the first round pick, and I'm sure his dynasty managers are awfully happy after what was, again, a pretty tough 1.5 year stretch and start to the man's career. So good stuff there, Chris. But now before we get out of here, it is time to go off the rails. Get that hat on. The conductor is here. Chris, go off.
All right, Jameis Winston's going to be a QB1 the rest of the season. I don't the way that he plays, and of course it becomes more of that aggression and becomes more of that double-edged sword that I talked about. But the fact that he is averaging around 10 air yards per attempt, going up against a lot of these defenses, and not even just the defenses, but the offenses that we know are going to be generating points. We talked earlier about his upcoming schedule. Pittsburgh, Denver, another shot at Pittsburgh, and the Chiefs. All offenses that we know can generate some points or at least put up enough offensive production that's going to keep him in a passing script. Ian noted earlier that they haven't shifted their offensive philosophy to focus a bit more on their running game. Haven't seen too much out of Nick Chubb or any of the rest of the running backs they currently have there. And of course, we are targeting all of their receivers. Over 100 air yards per game for Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy. All of those guys. If this is the way that the Browns want to play, if they want to try and stay in it or at least see what they have from a passing standpoint, and the schedule definitely lends itself to it, I'm saying Jameis Winston is going to be throwing that ball all over the yard, regardless of who's going to be the defensive secondary he's going to see. And so I'm saying Jameis Winston, QB1, book it. Don't even look at the box scores, especially don't look at the interception column. That's going to be Jameis Winston, QB1.
Our one true YOLO DGAF king. Good to have Jameis Winston back as a starting quarterback in the NFL. So appreciate you, Chris, and appreciate you guys out there for tuning in today. Myself and Joy McFarland will be back tomorrow, utilizationing and sheeshing as well. Always love making up new verbs on the spot. So for Chris, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.